It's time now for Mark Meets, in which I speak to the biggest names in the world of politics, sport, journalism and showbiz, as well as those who simply have a big story to tell. The Troubles in Northern Ireland saw a tragic loss of life on both sides, not just for those at war, but innocent civilians too. However, the brave journalists reporting the conflict in Northern Ireland faced just as much peril. And a brand new book about the dangers of reporting the Troubles and what these journalists went through is out now. It's the sequel to the best-selling Reporting the Troubles, and it's called Reporting the Troubles 2. There's a screenshot of the book itself. It's already a bestseller. Compiled by highly respected journalist Deric Henderson, with forwards by the former Irish Taoiseach Bertie Ahern and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, and with another valuable contribution from our very own panellist tonight, Mike Parry, who wrote a chapter, I'm delighted to say, that alongside Mike, Deric Henderson, co-author of this fascinating book, joins me now. Hi, Deric.
Good evening, Mark. How are you?
I'm very well. It's a privilege to have you on the show. Journalists face just as much peril as soldiers in a war setting, don't they?
Not quite, but there have been incidents where we have been under threat. I mean, I remember specifically in 1988 in Milltown Cemetery, the funerals of 3 IRA members who were shot dead by the SAS in Gibraltar, and the funerals were attacked by a loyalist, Michael Stone. That's probably as close as I've ever come to being injured or under threat. But I don't think, Troubles or the reporters had a front seat view of what was happening here, but in terms of their threat to their lives, it wasn't anything like faced the police and army and other people. But I think, unlike most trouble situations, I think journalists here have got away relatively quietly and without any great drama. One or two obviously were threatened. One or two had to leave Belfast during the worst of the Troubles. But by and large, I think journalists were left alone to get on with the job.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that. Why is journalism so important during a war?
Well, you can see it happening at the moment in Ukraine. Belfast wasn't anything on the same scale as it is over in that part of Europe. But journalism have a very important part to play in covering any war. It's not the first script of history. They're there to see, they're there to observe, they're there to report as impartially as they can, without favour or bias. I know it's very difficult at the moment for those journalists who are in the Ukraine at the moment and who are doing heroic work under very difficult and trying circumstances. It wasn't quite that bad in Belfast, but we, as I said, we had a front seat view of what was happening over here, and it was our job, as to say, to report impartially and fairly and accurately.
Well, the second volume of Reporting the Troubles is out now, with a foreword by the former Irish Taoiseach Bertie Ahern and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. What are some of the stories that stand out from this book as you compiled it, Deric?
Well, it's to say we wrote the first book in 2018 with 70 journalists from Belfast, London and Dublin who worked here during the height of the Troubles. Ivan and Little and myself decided we'd do a second volume. Again, 70 more journalists telling their stories, reflecting on their times working here during the worst of the Troubles. And you have to remember, there was hundreds and hundreds of journalists passed through here during those days. And some of them, it left a huge impression on them. I think that many of them felt, when we asked them if they would like to contribute to the book, all of them, without exception, agreed. They said it was a cathartic in many ways. It helped them to sort of, get over what had happened here. They reported, for years and years, but they never really told their own stories. And there's been some incredible pieces of work in this book. Journalists who really, looking back on what happened here, looking back on their times here, how difficult it was for them, how awkward it was for them, the impact it had on their family lives and home lives. A lot of the guys come over from London, including Mike Parry, who's sitting in your studio. And, it could have been, and it was very, very difficult and very challenging and very demanding.
What did they go through, Deric? Can you explain the challenges of reporting in the field? I'm glad that you've clarified, actually, both sides pretty much let the journalists get on with their work. I mean, of course, they would have faced some peril as civilians did. But what sort of challenges did they go through? Notwithstanding the mental trauma of being in such a dangerous and violent setting. But on a personal note, what did they go through?
Well, I mean, Belfast, covering the Northern Ireland story was very difficult. It was very complex. Even those of us who live and work here, and who grew up here, found it difficult. And I think the important thing was to be as neutral as possible, and that wasn't always easy, especially in the run-up to the signing of the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. There was pressures from all sides, pressures from political parties on journalists, pressures from the security forces on journalists, pressures on the paramilitaries, Republican and Loyalist. You were under considerable pressure from them, but it's basically was withstanding that, holding up to that, setting your face against all of that, and I think by and large, the journalists who worked here, who found it very difficult, especially visiting journalists, did a remarkably good job. I mean, there was very few that let it run away with themselves. They did the best under very trying circumstances, and I think most of the people, and especially those people who've contributed to this book and to the previous book, can look back on themselves with a certain amount of pride in what they did and what they achieved.
And clearly they entered, dangerous territory in Northern Ireland. They faced obviously some degree of peril in that context. Did they have to get to know these different groups? Would they go to bars and hang out with these people? Is that where they got the story?
Well, it's like any job in journalism. You're only as good as the people you know. And that took you to all sorts of places that weren't particularly nice. But you had to go there, and if that meant meeting paramilitary groups, individuals, people that you probably didn't particularly like, people that you certainly didn't share their views, but it was part of the job, and you had to go to places that were awkward, were difficult. But you had to meet these people, and as I say, you're only as good as the people you knew.
Deric, where would those places be when you talk about sort of an awkward place to go to meet someone from a paramilitary organisation? Would that be a sort of a hideout somewhere, a secret location?
Yes, it was. Yes, invariably it was. And you didn't always have to go on your own. There were colleagues from other organisations who went with you. These were always pre-arranged. And you didn't go unless you were satisfied that the people you were going to see weren't going to cause you any harm or cause any offence. And by and large, it was all fairly civilised. And yes, there was fear and trepidation at some stages, but you were basically let get on with the job.
Well, that's obviously a rare positive in what was decades of bloody and tragic conflict. Deric, you mentioned Mike Parry, of course. Radio broadcaster and a legend of Fleet Street journalism. Mike Parry, you've contributed a chapter to Reporting the Troubles too.
Yep.
Tell me about that chapter.
Yeah, my chapter was about the death of Lord Mountbatten. Just before we go any further, Mark, can I just point out that Deric has not really explained the nature of what he did over about 35 years. Now, I would have been described as a visiting fireman. I was based in Manchester when I first went there, then London, sometimes in Birmingham. I was in and I was out again. I didn't then have to worry about the consequences of a lot of my reporting because not everybody was happy with what you wrote. Both sides in the sectarian war were very good at PR, so they knew it wasn't a good idea to sort of, hurt, injure or even intimidate journalists, but nevertheless, you had to be very, very careful what you did. I was so young, I used to do things like jump in a car and drive to Crossmaglen because Crossmaglen was the terrorist capital of Europe. And I only didn't get into Crossmaglen one night when I was stopped by an army patrol on the road into Crossmaglen and warned by the soldiers who stopped me at gunpoint, did you know what you're doing? Why are you here? We advise you to turn around and go away. They were worried I was going to cause problems that they were going to have to clear up, you know. On another time, Deric, I went up to Dundalk to meet a guy, was his name Patsy McCardle, who was somebody we knew in the border area, and we were supposed to meet him in a bar, but we got warned off as we parked the car in the street by a lot of, you know, very unpleasant looking people carrying iron bars and that kind of stuff. So it was there all the time. But again, can I say, I was visiting fireman. At least two guys I know of who I worked with never went back to Ireland again after striking up friendships with girls in Belfast. There was a very strangely named disco in the top of the Europa Hotel called the Copacabana, believe it or not. Well, you know, it's least likely the Copacabana in the middle of Belfast during the Troubles than anywhere else in the world. But they met girls there and they were run out of town, literally, because those girls' fathers had some sort of active operation on what was going on there, and they were warned, A, you never see her again, B, you never come back. So it was that kind of thing. But again, I have to stress, Deric had to live through all that. Deric had to wake up with the consequences of what he'd filed in the papers in the town where he lived. By that time, I might have been on a plane and gone back. Now, on Mountbatten, I was very lucky, if you say lucky, I was working on the Birmingham Evening Mail on a bank holiday, and I was the last person left in the office after everybody had gone home, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it came through on the tapes, the Press Association, which Deric worked for and became the editor of in a very distinguished manner. And it said that Lord Mountbatten's boat had been subject to an explosion off the Irish coast. And a few minutes later, it confirmed that Mountbatten was dead and, unfortunately, 3 or 4 other people on the boat. And I just literally went. I was so young and so enthusiastic. I got out to Birmingham Airport. Believe it or not, there was a plane to Dublin, got over there, managed to pick up a hire car through deceiving the people at Avis about who I was, and shot off to the other side, Sligo and Mullaghmore, where it took place. And then I didn't sleep for 6 days, really, because when you're young, you're on a story like that, and it's so huge, and you're working on a paper. I was working for the Birmingham Evening Mail, 6 different editions a day. It just never stopped. But the adrenaline ran, and Deric, I think, will explain to you, adrenaline was something you needed in bucket loads to work in Northern Ireland, to work in Belfast, because you literally never knew what was going to happen next. I also worked there during the hunger strikes, and you knew when the next hunger striker had died, because the women in a place called the Divies Flats behind the Europa Hotel would come out in the middle of the night and start banging the pavement with dustbin lids. That was the Bush Telegraph. They knew, even before the authorities knew, that another hunger striker died. And it was that sort of anything could happen at any moment which dominated life when you worked in Northern Ireland.
And briefly, Mike Parry, it surprised me to hear that these paramilitary organisations made up of very often murderous men, gangsters, if you like, whose values and views we don't share, that they weren't tempted to threaten journalists in any way. I mean, I'm glad to hear that. But did you experience that too, that these organisations understood that you were not the enemy and that you had a job to do? Well,
look, I'd like Deric to answer that more fully than me, but can I just say about Ukraine, the reason the journalists are there is to get the truth. In Northern Ireland, it was like the other way around. There was a lot of propaganda being fed to you all the time, and then journalists picked it up. But Deric knew a lot more about that than me.
Deric, on that sort of the mental challenge of reporting for decades in such a war-torn area, all the anguish, did you have trouble leaving these issues behind you when you came home at night?
Absolutely. I mean, I remember in 1988, I was married with 2 young boys. I left the house one morning and didn't come home for 3 weeks. And that's the way it was. I mean, the job here was 24/7. The phones never stopped. You were on the go continually. It didn't make for a great home life, I have to say, at times. You know, journalists were married to, very tolerant partners because they were never there. The job was everything. The job came first. And, during the worst of the Troubles, especially post the hunger strikes of 1981, post the Anglo-Irish Agreement of 1985, right up through to the whole peace process which led towards the signing of the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, journalists were on the go non-stop. And that's what it was like here. It was very, very, very intense. And we thought that after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, things would improve. And yes, they did. Belfast today is a much better place than it was back in the days when Mike Parry used to come and see us. It's a great city. We're in a good place. But regrettably, we're not in as good a place as we should be. Yeah. And that, I think, is unfortunate. But compared to what it was in the early 70s and the mid-80s, Belfast, by and large, is at peace with itself. It's a great city. There's some fantastic people here doing great work. But as I say, the politics just haven't kicked in as well as we'd hoped. And although we're in a good place, I just wish we're in a much, much better place. We're not there.
Well,
yet.
That's right. The people of Northern Ireland deserve better. Deric, any regrets devoting so much of your life and your career to the Troubles in Northern Ireland? Would you do it all again?
Well, do I have any regrets? I don't have any regrets. Journalists back then, and Mike Parry will confirm this, we had the best of times. The job has changed completely now. We are in a different place, a different landscape, but regrets, absolutely none. Would I do it over again? I wouldn't want to go through what I went through back in those days, but journalism is a great profession. It remains a great profession, but it's a completely different landscape now to what I used to work in, especially with social media and so on. And when I came to Belfast in 1973, the Belfast Telegraph were selling something like 225,000 copies a day. Now they'd be lucky if they were selling 25,000 copies, and that's just the way things are. It's a pity, but to say we had the best of times, I think.
Well, Deric, it's a remarkable legacy that you have in journalism. The book is compiled by yourself and Ivan Little. You've done an amazing job. The book is called Reporting the Troubles. Thank you, Tatiana. There's the screenshot of the book. More journalists tell their stories of the Northern Ireland conflict. It's a fascinating read and an important read as well. My sincere thanks to its co-compiler, Deric Henderson, and contributor to the book, Mike Parry.